In the small town of New Oak, Wisconsin, USA, lived 62-year-old Lynn Ernan. The woman resided alone, having long outlived all members of her family. Around 5 years ago, her health significantly deteriorated. After doctors diagnosed her with chronic lung disease and severe depression, Lynn hired a 39-year-old caregiver named Jessie Kruchevska, who had been looking after her for the past few years. During this time, the women developed a close, almost familial relationship full of mutual trust. The last few months were the hardest for Lynn due to unbearable abdominal pain that restricted her to a liquid diet. Lynn's strict diet and medication regimen was closely monitored by her assistant Jessie. On October 3, 2018, Jessie Kruchevska called 911, reporting that she had found Lynn dead in her apartment, sitting in a chair surrounded by spilled medications. In an anxious voice, the woman told the dispatcher that her patient had been suffering intolerably from stomach pain, which only worsened with each passing day. In Jessie's opinion, it was this agony that drove Lynn to take a fatal dose of medicine to end her suffering. The medics who arrived at the scene pronounced Lynn Ernan dead, likely from a drug overdose. To confirm this version, it was necessary to conduct all the required procedures, including a toxicology examination. The medical examiner took samples of blood and tissue. The results showed an abnormally high level of one substance. Interestingly, its source was not the pills found near the body, but rather eye drops for redness and allergies available over the counter. In small doses when administered to the eyes, this substance is completely safe. However, oral consumption in significant quantities poses a serious threat to life, causing vomiting, internal bleeding, memory loss and even death at high concentrations. Moreover, it is an extremely painful process, confirming the caregiver's account of Lynn's prolonged stomach anguish before her death. The choice of such a complicated and horrific way to take one's life, instead of simpler and more humane methods, surprised the medical examiner. This question remained unanswered and alerted the specialist. He suggested to the detectives that Lynn may have been the victim of a murder. They agreed to thoroughly investigate everything and began looking into this unusual case. The first person the investigators spoke to was the caregiver Jessie Kruchevska, who had called the emergency services. She and her mother Jennifer, who was present during the interrogation, were invited to the police station for questioning. Jennifer was visibly worried and feared that her daughter could be accused of committing a crime. However, with her strange behavior, the woman only drew additional attention from law enforcement to Jessie, reinforcing their suspicions. The detectives tried to find out from the caregiver the possible motives and reasons that could have pushed Lynn to voluntarily end her life in such an agonizing way. And although the version of suicide by overdose due to depression was not yet dismissed, the reactions of Jessie and her mother raised certain doubts among the police officers. The investigators were interested in whether the deceased had shown signs of depression or attempts at suicide before. They were also looking for an explanation for the excruciating abdominal pain the woman complained about before her death. However, Jessie did not show much willingness to cooperate with the investigation and evaded direct answers, which only intensified the suspicions against her. But in the absence of solid evidence, the woman was released. The detectives were eagerly awaiting the results of the toxicology examination. The received report confirmed the version of an extremely high concentration of the substance from the eye drops in Lynn's blood. The lethal dose was contained in at least 4 bottles, and according to the test results, the deceased had consumed even more, a minimum of 6. This must have caused unbearable pain and spasms in the stomach until death occurred. The investigators' attention was also drawn to the fact that Jennifer, Jessie's mother, was a friend of the deceased and had recommended her daughter's services as a caregiver to her. Both women jointly cared for Lynn over an extended period. The behavior of Jennifer also seemed suspicious to the police officers, raising a number of additional questions. Another strange coincidence was Jennifer's purchase of an expensive 75-inch TV literally immediately after Lynn's death, despite the woman's rather modest income. The victim's car had passed into Jessie's possession altogether. The detectives continued to closely monitor the unusual behavior of the mother and daughter, which only reinforced the version of an intentional murder, rather than suicide. After all, usually after committing a crime, the perpetrators try in every way to cover their tracks, destroy evidence and conceal their involvement. But in this case, the situation looked completely different. The investigators drew attention to the constant discrepancies in the testimonies of Jessie and her mother. It seemed that they were both trying to convince everyone of the version of Lynn's suicide by intentional drug overdose. At the same time, neither the mother nor the daughter showed any signs of grief or sorrow for the deceased, but instead openly enjoyed the inherited property. This only intensified the detectives' suspicions. Law enforcement officials assumed that Jessie was most likely the one who committed the crime. Although her mother Jennifer periodically visited her friend's home, she had limited access. Unlike her daughter, who was there almost every day for several hours and could freely manage the owner's food and medicine. Jessie claimed that she had sincerely become attached to her employer, perceiving her almost as a relative. But the police officers believed that this trust played a fatal role, as Lynn made the mistake of letting her future killer into her life. Both suspects showed an increased interest in the progress of the investigation, regularly calling the police station to inquire about the progress of the case. This testified not so much to their concern, but to their fear of being exposed. The women tried to keep their finger on the pulse to smooth their own anxiety. But for an arrest, more solid evidence was needed to ensure a just punishment for the guilty. For their part, Jessie and her mother could not help but notice the close attention from the investigation. The caregiver tried in every way to justify herself, repeating during her visits to the station about the warm, almost maternal feeling she had for Lynn. Jessie insisted that the accusations were unfounded, and her constant closeness to her ward was solely due to her professional duties to care for the sick woman. Despite this, the detectives relied not only on assumptions. At first, Jessie refused to comment on the abnormally high level of the drug in the victim's blood. Only when she hit a dead end did she explain that Lynn really often used the drops, including on her own when left unattended. According to her, this caused a disruption in Lynn's cognitive functions and led to uncontrolled actions. Soon the police found an important witness, a young man named Andrew, who had a trusting, friendly relationship with the murdered woman. Lynn sincerely sympathized with the guy's family and actually became a second grandmother to him, supporting him financially during his college studies, as she had no children of her own. The woman even intended to leave part of her inheritance to Andrew. He initially refused, seeking to preserve the sincerity of their relationship, but Lynn insisted on legally securing her intentions. She explained this by saying that she had no one else to pass her property to anyway, so she wanted to at least help the young man a little. But they never managed to finalize all the details. Andrew himself claimed that the amount was $50,000. He had visited Lynn many times and personally knew the caregiver Jessie. Having learned about the suspicions against her and her mother, the guy suggested that the motive for the crime was the banal greed of this duo. It is quite possible that Jessie overheard Lynn's conversation with Andrew and was afraid of losing the opportunity to inherit. Interestingly, upon Lynn's death, all her property did indeed go to the caregiver Jessie. Already after the funeral, Andrew tried to contact her, hoping to receive the promised share of the funds. But Jessie refused, referring to the large debts of the deceased, for the payment of which almost all the money allegedly went. Disappointed, the young man decided to consult with lawyers to verify this information. Having learned about such intentions, Jessie immediately contacted Andrew and showed documents that supposedly confirmed the repayment of the debt. The amount that remained was about $26,000, half of which she agreed to give to the guy. But later, the police officers studied these papers and found out that they were forged. In fact, Jessie had not made any payments. Investigating the financial side of the case, the detectives discovered a whole series of dubious transactions carried out by the caregiver during the entire period of work for Lynn. Jessie systematically submitted applications for loans on behalf of her employer. Using her personal data, banks readily approved requests and issued substantial sums, although the obligations were nominally assigned to the victim. But the real beneficiary of these loans was Jessie herself. During the specified period, the total amount of credit funds she received reached about $300,000, of which a little less than $100,000 remained at the time of police intervention. Under the pressure of evidence, the accused claimed that all these transactions were carried out solely at the initiative of Lynn herself. Allegedly, the victim personally provided the necessary documents and spent the money, while Jessie herself did not even touch them. However, the collected facts refuted such statements. As for the substance from the eye drops, Jessie explained that Lynn often asked her to buy 4 bottles at a time. Allegedly, the patient knew how to properly apply the drops to the eyes, so the caregiver did not monitor the use of the medication. But law enforcement officials were skeptical about these words. After all, no bottles of drops were found at the scene where the body was discovered. Instead, there were pills scattered around, traces of which were not found in the victim's body. Jessie claimed that the bottles were on the bedside table, but a thorough search of the house did not confirm this. There were more and more contradictions in the testimonies. This suggested a planned deception. Probably, someone deliberately got rid of the packaging to hide the true circumstances of the tragedy. The forensic examination proved that the woman had been exposed to the drug orally for a long time, which led to severe poisoning with unbearable pain and ultimately, to a fatal end. The consumption of such a large dose immediately before death seemed to be an extremely unlikely coincidence. Jessie's behavior clearly indicated criminal intent. It is interesting to note that the suspect herself initiated contacts with the investigation, constantly coming to the police station and inquiring about the progress of the case. The woman categorically denied having a motive for killing her employer, rejecting any hints of financial interest or desire to take possession of the victim's property. However, the detectives could not get the story with the medications out of their minds. When the investigators began to put pressure on Jessie, she gave an incredible version of events. According to her, Lynn loved adding eye drops to alcohol, allegedly to enhance the taste sensations. Jessie claimed that she was not aware of the danger of such experiments, considering it just an eccentric habit of her ward. The caregiver said that on the last day, she brought home another batch of 4 bottles of eye drops. Moreover, according to her, over the past 6 months, Lynn had been diluting the drops with water, creating a strange cocktail. This story sounded absurd, but, in the opinion of the investigators, it was an attempt to confuse the investigation and cover up the available evidence. Jessie rushed from one version to another, anticipating a quick exposure. As a result, a decision was made to arrest the 40-year-old caregiver on suspicion of premeditated murder and concealment of evidence. An analysis of data from Jessie's cell phone provided additional valuable information to the investigation. It turned out that the suspect was actively texting with her husband Scott, and it was these conversations that attracted special attention from law enforcement. Jessie's claims about her complete ignorance of the harmfulness of ingesting eye drops looked like a lie. Long before the crime, the woman carefully studied the properties of various medicines on the internet, looking for something suitable for the implementation of her plan. Her choice fell on a substance found mainly in eye drops. It was easy to obtain, imperceptibly add to food or drinks, which made it an ideal weapon. Given Lynn's cognitive problems, this task did not seem too difficult. Jessie's correspondence with her lover revealed another important fact. A few months before the tragedy, she wrote to Scott that Lynn was feeling unwell and vomiting blood. The woman was hospitalized with a diagnosis of acute intoxication with the very substance from the drops. So, Jessie knew about the consequences of exposure to the drug. The detectives wanted to find out if Scott was involved in the poisoning. During interrogation, the man strongly denied his awareness of Jessie's plans, although, according to her, he knew about the previous cases of Lynn's poisoning. However, Scott stated that he did not take his wife's stories seriously until the police visited. He considered Jessie a pathological liar and was going to end their relationship. When she told him about another poisoning of Lynn, Scott decided that it was a fabrication to evoke his sympathy and renew the romance. In the fall of 2018, Jessie informed her husband that Lynn had again been hospitalized with signs of acute drug intoxication and connected to life support devices. In fact, at that moment, the woman was already dead. Scott, tired of constant manipulation, was just about to leave Jessie. She tried to deceive him again by sending messages about Lynn's serious condition in order to arouse pity and maintain the relationship. Perhaps, for the sake of keeping Scott, Jessie decided to stage a poisoning, putting the woman's life in danger, whom she called her second mother. Could a fatal mistake have led to a deadly overdose, or was everything from the very beginning conceived as an intricate plan to take possession of the inheritance? It seems that Jessie had two motives. The main one, of course, was the thirst for money. Having taken out loans in Lynn's name, she risked being exposed sooner or later. Perhaps the victim found out the truth, which signed her death warrant. Jessie simply took advantage of the situation to appropriate all the assets of her ward. The second reason for the murder could be the desire to keep her beloved husband. Scott's threats to leave forced Jessie to resort to manipulation, hiding behind the suffering of the sick Lynn. The suspect wove a web of lies around herself, through which it was not easy to discern the truth. Despite the persuasiveness of the evidence, Jessie never admitted her guilt, insisting on the version of Lynn's love for combining alcohol with eye drops, which she allegedly abused. The trial in this case began in October 2023. By that time, the prosecution had established the extent of the defendant's financial fraud. Since 2016, Lynn Ernan's credit limit had grown from zero to an impressive amount of $72,000, but this was only the tip of the iceberg. After the victim's death, valuables worth $16,000 disappeared from her house, probably used to pay off Jessie's debts. She claimed that she was only paying off the loans taken out by Lynn herself, but the origin of this money was known. In total, during the time of caring for Lynn, Jessie took out loans in her name for $300,000 and stole property worth $155,000 after her death. At first, everything disappeared, but it turned out that the money began to quickly flow into the suspect's account almost immediately after the death of the employer. This was the money from the sale of the stolen goods. Lynn, a wealthy single woman, had not used loans before, so the sharp jump in debt burden that coincided with the appearance of a new caregiver immediately attracted the attention of the investigation. A study of Jessie's biography showed that she had a criminal past full of fraud, forgery of documents, theft, and gambling addiction. Problems with gambling began back in 2010, when Jessie resorted to deception, wheedling $4,000 from two people by taking out loans in their names. 2 months later, she lost $45,000. To win back, Jessie borrowed another $2,500 using her mother's documents, and also took a loan for more than $6,000. In the end, she owed $6,500 taken against the security of her mother's car. The fraudster never returned this money. Jennifer almost lost the car and had to collect numerous certificates to prove that she had not taken these loans. After being exposed, Jessie was sent to prison for 2 years, but she was released early for exemplary behavior, not even having served the full term. Jessie's mother openly talked about her daughter's strong gambling addiction. The prosecution insisted that the murder was premeditated and committed for profit. Jessie could write off all the loans issued in the name of a sick woman with impaired cognitive functions, who allegedly thoughtlessly got into debt. While behind bars, Jessie told her cellmate the details of Lynn's murder. She claimed that she did it out of compassion, unable to watch any longer as the woman slowly died from serious illnesses and unbearable pain. Jessie positioned her act as an act of humanity, emphasizing that she had long watched the suffering of the dying ward before deciding to ease her fate. The defense considered the prosecution's version unfounded, and their client innocent. Lynn did indeed suffer from serious diseases, such as memory disorders, chronic stomach problems, and a general deterioration in well-being. The lawyer claimed that Lynn herself preferred to combine alcohol with eye drops, mistakenly believing that it helped her fall asleep and brought temporary relief. The employer convinced Jessie of the safety of such treatment and insisted on its use, not suspecting the possible danger. The prosecutor's version was different. The prosecutor was convinced that on the day of the crime, Jessie had made her ward drink a solution prepared from the contents of 6 bottles of eye drops. This amount significantly exceeded the lethal dose, which was 4 bottles. Obviously, the woman acted purposefully and was not going to give the victim any chance of survival. At the trial, the defendant confirmed that she had given Lynn a drink with the contents of 6 bottles. Initially, the caregiver allegedly refused to do this, but after a long argument, she gave in, although she did not know about the mortal danger. Then Jessie went out for a few hours on business, having no idea how much of the solution Lynn had drunk and how it would affect her. Lynn's previous hospitalization with acute poisoning from eye drops cast doubt on the defendant's version of the ward's accidental self-poisoning. The woman should have remembered the consequences of the first incident and avoided the repeated risk. Jessie also now had information about the negative effects of the substance from the drops. The key evidence against the version of an accident was the absence of the bottles themselves near the body of the deceased. This indicated that someone else was helping her take this medicine. The verdict was delivered on November 14, 2023. Jessie was found guilty of first-degree intentional murder, theft of personal belongings and money, as well as falsification of evidence. Upon hearing the court's decision, she burst into tears. The woman was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole after 40 years. No charges were brought against Jessie's relatives and lover. But the story did not end there. Even behind bars, Jessie continued to weave fraudulent schemes. Sometime after the trial, a police officer received a note from her friend. The letter contained step-by-step instructions from Jessie on how to fabricate evidence in her favor. The plan was to create an audio recording where Lynn allegedly expresses her last will and desire to voluntarily end her life. For this, it was planned to use a special device to change the voice. Jessie explained in detail where to find Lynn's real recording so that the fake would be similar to the original. The text even had a quote that the friend had to read out as if from Lynn. The victim allegedly spoke about unbearable pain, health problems and deep depression, which made the decision to commit suicide inevitable. The defense considered the prosecution's version unfounded, and their client innocent. Lynn did indeed suffer from serious illnesses, such as memory disorders, chronic stomach problems, and a general deterioration in well-being. The lawyer claimed that Lynn herself preferred to combine alcohol with eye drops, mistakenly believing that it helped her fall asleep and brought temporary relief. The employer convinced Jessie of the safety of such treatment and insisted on its use, not suspecting the possible danger. Ultimately, Jessie's web of lies and the evidence against her led to her conviction for the calculated murder of the woman she called a second mother. Please write your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. For those who are new here, subscribing is the best way to stay updated on future content. Also give a like please. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Until next time, friends.